Beep.
You should use that sound clip if you need to bleep out anybody's name.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
Katie. Kyle Perkins, coming to you live from a different apartment here in Jordan Beep Zone.
Hey, I never authorized my last name to be a part of this podcast.
Huh? Beep it out.
Alright, before we actually get started, and after all of this shenanigans, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. We are on Facebook. We also have a Patreon, so if you would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help would be greatly appreciated. And our topic this week, we are going to be continuing our conversation of brainstorming a setting. Last time, we got all the way through the cosmology. We successfully did that in an hour. And we got a little bit established about what races exist in the world. But we're going to go ahead and give a recap, just so that everybody has it fresh in their minds what we have established about this world, and then we're going to get into filling everything else out that the players need to know at the start of the campaign.
The recap. There was a creative force called the Will. There are two racial groupings, Immortals and Mortals, created by the Will. The Immortals are worshipped as gods by the Mortals. The Mortals were created when the Will fractured into races. The races are getting, quote, weaker as they get further and further from the Will and bloodlines spread. Law versus chaos is the main dichotomy. Other possible dichotomies include supernatural versus natural. Factions who want to breed like rabbits, factions who want to live long, factions who want to cannibalize game power exist in this world. There is something also that exists outside of all that is known, that is being introduced into the setting and is a major factor. This could be explored by the PCs during the course of the campaign. Immortals exist on a different planet from the mortal races. Was that supposed to be plane, perchance, or did we say
Yeah, it's kind of both. It's a different physical body upon which they walk.
Sun, planet where mortals live. Then beyond that is a Dyson sphere where the immortals live. The mortal world. Earth-like ecosystems. Oceans have merfolk who are more like sea lion merpeople. Thunderbird is the apex predator in the world that can eternally fly and only comes to the ground to feed. There's a steppe race that are gnomes with prairie dog-like culture afraid of the Thunderbirds. The elves are isolationist groups, and long-lived and concerned with expanding their power, tend to live in remote, hard-to-access areas. Bat-like halflings in the mountains, orc/goblins in the forest, jungle dwarves, and the most terrifying of all of our creations, the sentient cactus people in the desert that are meat-eaters and are the bad guy race. The race reproduces by being split off. Fire, however, can stop the wounds from growing into new individuals.
So if you're for some reason coming into this two-parter at part 2, and any of that stream of consciousness interests you, stop listening. Go back to part 1. It's worth it. Then come back and keep listening. I don't mean like stop listening and unsubscribe from the podcast.
The whole thing?
Yeah. Please don't do that.
So where do we go from here? We have the world. We have a very vague outline of who is in the world. What's happened in this world? Like where do you guys start having this base knowledge? Do you start with a history, or do you start with figuring out who the power players are now and basically working out a history retroactively to make sense of where everything is now?
I feel like I usually start with, like, who's the top dog, because that's going to make it easier to go back and retroactively decide what happened to make them the top dog versus trying to figure that out and just having it sort of organically happen, I feel like. That's what I do, at least.
I like to do this like the guy who essentially performed gladiatorial death matches with an entire bag of Skittles to find the strongest Skittle.
What?
You know that story?
No.
This guy, it's a copy pasta. This dude writes in to, whoever makes Skittles, I don't know, the massive food conglomerate. And he's like, "Hello, I purchased a bag of your Skittles. I took each Skittle 2 by 2 and pressed them together, and then crushed. One would crush, the other would survive. I then took it and pitted it against the next Skittle. I have sent you the strongest single Skittle from the bag for breeding purposes.
And so that's you anytime you create
A bunch of
mystery.
Yeah. What are your guys' methods over there?
Well, there's, out of those races, I mean, not all of them, from the way that we've formulated them, seem like they would have anything like politics or diplomacy in the way that we think about it, right? Like, I have a hard time imagining what the geopolitical policy is of the cactus people. The humans, the elves, maybe the merfolk, dwarves, whatever. So I guess like the first thing would be figuring out which ones are actually political forces that have organizations that we can like articulate, and which ones are more like weird, primitive, or maybe just like extremely alien kinds of civilizations that other more traditional nations wouldn't really even know how to interface with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like to establish what the current status quo is and kind of go backward from there and like figure out how the status quo got to where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, the cactus people that we have yet to give an official name. I would like for them to be like we've established that they have to go around and eat meat, and we're establishing that they eat sentient people,
mm-hmm.
and that's one of the ways they grow power. So they would be very much a marauding band. So we can use, if we want to take historical precedents, we have a lot of marauding bands of cultures that we could use for the basis of how they structure their society.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all sorts of Plains Indians or Plains Native Americans in North America. We've got like the Mongol hordes.
Mm-hmm.
We've got any culture that has existed on a big flat area. We established that the cactus people are in the desert. Like the Sahara Desert itself is the largest desert in our world. So we could look at like the Tuareg people there kind of as a basis of how their society structures.
Mm-hmm. Is there something about the biology of the cactus people that makes them kind of stuck in the desert? Because without something like that, or some kind of like active fight against them, they seem pretty fucking powerful.
Well,
they'll probably, overrun a lot of stuff.
You overwater a cactus, you're going to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they
can't overfeed.
Yeah, I don't quite know how to translate that into a sentient race.
Well, cactuses are fucking hardy. And so maybe at one point they were a very powerful force in the world, and everybody else managed to beat them back. Mm-hmm. So now they are still in the most inhospitable areas of the world, but they are still a very strong threat that whenever they pop up, you need to be like on it,
mm-hmm.
destroying it, killing it with fire to prevent them from growing as powerful as they once were.
Mm-hmm.
So we've essentially sent them off to the reservation.
I was not going to go there. I was thinking more of...
No, I think that holds. Yeah.
Well, what I'm getting at here is that the only reason they're in the desert is because we don't want to live in the desert.
Right.
And so we've burned them out anywhere they're around, and then the desert, that's where they live, because nothing else lives there.
And how are you going to burn them out in the desert? You're going to, truck in wood to set a bonfire for these things?
In no way am I
Pretty
comparing
safe place.
Native Americans to these cactus people. Let me get that straight. Cactus people are evil.
Are they?
Have you ever met a cactus person?
You know what? You're right. I'm pretty prejudiced against cactus people. Fuck.
I kind of like that idea. I like I've always had a fondness for, in Stellaris, there's, fallen empires, where, at one time, they were these galaxy-spanning
Mm-hmm.
things, and now that they either, think everyone's beneath them, and they just, huddle in their enclave, or, they were destroyed, and now they don't trust anyone, or they just, got bored,
Mm-hmm.
and are let's see what happens if everyone else has a share of the pie, and they just, hang out and watch, I kind of like that idea, but less benign and more just these things were a massive threat and we're going to overthrow overrun everything. And instead we just everybody got together and we fucking pushed them in the desert, and now, like, maybe every 5 years, some of, like, the strongest warriors are picked to go in there and, like, tend the herd, you know?
I think the natural counter power to these things then, since these things probably live for a long time, would be elves. Like, if you've got some ancient way back, like, struggle that's since, like, just become the foundation of things, elves have been around for fucking ever. If anyone's gonna go on some, like, damn near planet scale, like, ecosystem change, like this, it would be a race like that, I think.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I really like having an ancient culture that is no longer in power and at one time was the apex of culture, the apex of technology, the apex of knowledge. It's a huge trope in fantasy, and I like having bad guys having been that.
Mm-hmm.
Are these cactus people at all redeemable? Are they playable? Can you play a cactus person who only eats
small animals?
Yeah,
or
like the rat sucking vampire.
I would be hesitant to make them a player character race, but I would be totally on board with just having their having the things that we're saying here be the common knowledge of the people of the world and being filtered through, well, we defeated their empire, they eat meat, so they must have been evil.
Right? So, like, you could play one and deal with that prejudice, I suppose, but it's not a guaranteed thing. Like, your character doesn't wake up every day and be like, I must consume, and you'd, like, make a will check to, like, not eat your party.
I like the idea that a DM playing this setting we've created could do a campaign where, like, the players actually go into the desert and find out the truth of these cactus people and actually learn about their society. So, yeah, I like that just common knowledge is they used to rule the world, but now they sweep the streets they used to own.
Oh, we're going Tears for Fears, not Coldplay.
Oh no, I was trying to go Coldplay.
Okay, I was hoping we were going Tears for Fears, and then we went Coldplay.
You're right.
Something I hate in
Coldplay,
settings,
me too.
Yeah, well, in music and then also in settings, are monocultures. Like, every dwarf is like this. Every elf is like this. Every cactus person is like this. Mm-hmm. Are we going to have where there is significant variation within a particular culture? It's something that is done just to be expedient and to be able to put into a nice little stat block of, here is a paragraph about their culture and ecology, and this is all that exists. Dwarves are underground, they dig and they blacksmith, and that is everything that their world revolves around. Or do we want to make each of the cultures variable so that there are trends, but you can go from one dwarf culture to another dwarf culture and it be radically different?
Well, I think that's the thing I like about jungle dwarves, is that, like, the jungle's so dense and different in certain places that you could have different cultures of dwarves and different tribes that, like, are distinct. And if in our hypothetical rulebook for this world, you can have subsets of dwarves that give different stat advantages or skill advantages or whatever, if we're looking at this in a D&D context, and also give you a different flavor for playing that sort of dwarf. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the elves, if anything, are going to be pretty I'm sorry, I just drawn a blank on the
monoculture.
Monoculture. Besides the two that are at different poles, I guess they might have, like, some differences. But the dwarves could be, like, a very diverse race, and, like, same thing for our humans, which I think we just said are, like, everywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that depends on how many there are. If you've got, like, only one particular weird mountain range where the, bat-like halflings live, That probably is a monoculture, because that's the fucking last that there is of these things. But, if you've got them scattered all over the place in large numbers, then, yeah, you're going to see a lot of diversity. I think the one exception that I would put on that is that, when you've got like a mammalian or some kind of like, higher sentient race, monoculture is like reductionist and boring and everything. But if you've got something as alien and weird as these cactus people or like, insect races in sci-fi or whatever, it makes them interesting and strange and hard to deal with if they do behave as some like hive or like, some kind of composite organism or something like that. Like sometimes that's cool. Not good for, player character races, obviously, but as like mind flayers in D&D. They're all kind of working on their same operation as just like drones.
So we're going to try to have at least the mammalian cultures, non-cactus people, be pretty diverse. You can play several different varieties of like dwarves or elves or other things like that. You looked like you were about to make a comment. You went like this.
No, sorry. My bad. I'm counting. Okay. How many playable races we have. I'm sorry. That was my hand up. It looks like we've got 6, I believe. Merfolk, the gnomes, elves, halflings, orcs, and dwarves.
Plus humans.
Oh, plus those dirty humans.
Gotta
forgot
have
about
humans.
them.
Wait, did you include orcs? Yeah, you said orcs. Okay.
So 7 races?
Okay, so what are we going to focus on? What is more important whenever we make this setting? Where we are and creating the history of, like, going back and, like, creating a history that fits with where everything is right now, who all the power players are? Or is it more important to establish that history in order to inform the world as it is now? How do you go about doing it, and which do you think is what we're going to be doing here? I personally like to give the history very broad strokes, but I don't tie anything down. I'm more concerned with what is the world now session 1, when the player characters enter into the world and start interacting with it. What is the world that they are in? And I just kind of, I wing a lot of the history. It's more important to me to know who the power players are now than knowing the history of the kingdom.
Well, I think that the why things are now is important. I don't think you necessarily have to have like this long drawn out like
Silmarillion.
Tolkien-esque, like deep dive into every age that came prior, but some set of like conventional understandings of this and this and this happened, and that's why we're here now. I think that adds some depth and detail to a world that's pretty cool.
I've always found that there's the rare set of players that are like, oh my god, I want to know everything about the dwarves since they were here, blah, blah, blah. But for most cases, the players are like, I'm interacting with these people right now, I might not want to. Mm-hmm. I just need the bare minimums of how they operate and why they operate this way. Mm-hmm. And so it's fun for me to sit down and like really chart out how they got here, but I noticed, at least in games that I've run where I've sat down and like made this extensive like historiography and like, what happened in a far past, people are just like, that doesn't matter. In my head it does, but the players don't really care. So I almost agree that it's better to just be like, here is how these things are operating, and it's good for you to have a basic understanding of knowing why that is. Mm-hmm.
I'm for doing broad strokes for each of these races, not going into Tolkien-esque level of detail, even though maybe out of all of us, maybe I am the one who enjoys the most going into that level of detail. But especially since we're designing by committee here, I don't want to decide what our power players are right now before we really even know anything about these races. So why don't we do broad strokes, history of the races? We've touched the cactus people enough and it hurt because they're cacti. And we should flesh out the other races a bit more, and then we can all kind of talk about who we want our power players to be, who's going to be the most interesting in those roles, etc. I don't think it should be humans by default.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Why not?
It's boring. It's boring.
But if you make if I don't care which race is the dominant one or the one who's like the big power player, as long as they're interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the reason why humans tend to be the default like power base in settings the reason I see it is that they tend to be the ones that the author can sit and say, okay, here's all of these interesting ways in which humans can be different from each other. And it kind of goes back to my argument about the different races being like kind of just representing all a single culture. If we decide to make a particular race the main power player right now, we kind of are also giving them more impetus to be more diverse in their power. So, broad stroke, who do you think should be, we'll go around, who do you think should be the main race of this setting? Main power race. Who gets shit done?
I always think it's humans that manage the measure of the world. I don't know. They're the easiest to relate to, and it's what most people play.
I agree with that.
I could see it being humans. I think it could also be elves. We have a dichotomy of, like, who opposed the cactus people for the longest time. Probably the elves is, like, a natural antagonist. And I kind of like the idea that, like, since they were maybe pushing that fight, that makes them, like, the current top dog for whatever reason. I mean, there's not a lot of them. But, like, they probably got magic, and they've lived all this time, and they're powerful, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they probably don't let the other races forget that they, like, led the charge against the cactus people. So I could do elves. So I got 2 for humans, 1 for elves.
Well, I either allow us to proceed or put us into a stalemate. So,
you know what you should do. Put us into a stalemate.
I mean, looking at our list of races, there are a lot of races here that could arguably have more primitive cultures compared to the elves. Last episode we had talked about the elves living on, like, the polar ice caps and being the ones who are always isolated and studying the Dyson sphere that surrounds the planet on which the mortals live, the mortal realm. It would be maybe interesting to have a bunch of, and have that be maybe like a trend in this game, this idea of barbarism and the natural world coming into contact and being at odds with the supernatural world. We had talked about that dichotomy. And so maybe humans, orcs, dwarves, halflings, gnomes, maybe they're all more tribal, more like fucking Conan, and the elves on the ice caps are more intellectual, and then all of them have to, you know, come into contact in order to deal with this supernatural Dyson sphere world. Whether or not we go with that, I don't know. I guess it's probably better to have the elves not be the main race if they're this isolated, esoteric, arcane group.
What if we do the elves kind of like the way that the Vulcans were in the early days of the Federation in Star Trek, where they are hands down the most advanced race, that they're more guardians.
Mm-hmm.
They are isolationists. They don't want to do things with their power. They're content to just make sure that the cactus people remain in check and to allow the other races to do their own thing. But when push comes to shove, the elves can put their thumb on things and do a show of force to basically get people in line. They don't do it often, but nobody doubts that they can do that.
Most of the time they're just chilling with their telescopes in the Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah.
I like that. I like
me
that.
too.
And I'm down to have humans be
The go-getters.
the main race that people play. Are elves going to be playable? Are we? Is that acceptable? Like the idea of a Spock-like character who is more in line to go out and see the world and be in an adventuring party and not be in the Fortress of Solitude.
Well, if we're doing monocultures, then no, we can't. But we're not doing monocultures, so yes, we can.
I was going to say, no, we're not. Okay,
I think they'd have to be like an elf that's like generational, so they're not an OG elf.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, you got to balance that power level out because they're already going to be coming in with a bit of juice that the other folks don't have. And
well, it could be the same thing as the excuse you always have for a monk being in the party is just part of their
yes,
coming up that they got to go
I
out,
need to do
see
this
the
thing.
world, and then come back to the
monastery.
Yeah.
So the elves go on Rumspringa.
Yeah.
I kind of like that idea actually. That they don't want to completely lose touch. Plus, they need new information.
Right.
That's not just scrying or whatever. So they're like, yes, youth, go out and tell us what happens in the land of the other races. And I like that idea.
By the way, if we go back for just a second, I want to say one more thing about why I think it's best to have humans or some very human-like thing being the core race of a thing. I think that if you have an established default race that has a lot of diversity within them, it makes all of the other races that are often much more homogenous because of their scale more special. I think that it's cool to have a point of contrast. If you've got a nation of elves that is as diverse as a nation of humans, the only difference is the ears. It's no longer this, magical, interesting, different thing. You know what I mean?
Well, this is an entire topic in and of itself. But,
Yeah.
But that's how players play them anyway.
Well,
Elves are just humans with ears.
I'm not into that.
My experience, majority of people who play elves, or any non-human race, and then you get into a party where, in the world, you have established that 85% of the player character population is human, and then 4 out of the 5 players choose a non-human race.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see the racial disparity within the world be reflective of what is realistically going to happen in the party, where all of the other races are just as numerous as the humans.
Mm-hmm.
I really like to try to structure the world so that the party itself can be seen as a microcosm of the world.
You want the party to be a UN envoy of the setting?
That's often how it happens. That's how Abeno went.
Right.
Here's an idea. So maybe we don't have a standard 85% of the world is this race. We just don't have one. Plain, simple. All of the races that aren't elves, that are more... Again, I guess I haven't decided if you guys like this idea, or I haven't heard if you guys like this idea or not, but the races that aren't the advanced elves, that are a little more tribal, possibly, maybe they, and we've designed them around different biomes, except for humans, maybe all of these races actually have pretty significant disadvantages when they're in a different biome, and so they all tend to sort of stick to their biomes. And in that regard, the adventuring party is more reminded, hey, you're not playing a human with ears. Or is that too complicated?
I don't know. I feel like constraining, this idea of constraining the preponderance of a race to a particular biome is, I don't like it, just because, evolutionary speaking, humans are sub-Saharan biome creatures, but we live in every single biome. I want all of these creatures that we have to have that versatility where, yes, they are best in that biome, but they don't really suffer ill effects if they go to other biomes.
Let me ask you this then. If that's the case, what is special about humans? Every other race has something that's fairly obviously special about them that's, a traditional thing. elves are intelligent and live a long time. Dwarves are stout and, have a lot of ingenuity. But what is it that makes humans anything? Are they just like the bland average?
I'm fine with them just being the bland average. That's how most role players tend to view humans whenever they look at all of the other races that are available.
It depends on how they get statted out. 5th edition definitely makes it clear that the special thing about them is how diverse they are versus other races that are like very much the thing that they're kind of built to be. All right. Humans are the leftovers.
So we're kind of drilling down as to what makes up these individual races. What are the major forces in this world that has existed and is continuing to have influence? Like in the real world, we've had many different empires and cultures rise up and fall, and it culminated into where we are now. In very broad strokes, what are some of the things that have happened in this world, in its history, that has caused the world to be in the state that it is now?
Okay, hold up.
Wait, hold up.
Cacti don't eat humans. They eat all the other races. I'm serious. They don't, for some reason, they can't eat humans. That's why humans are special and can live anywhere and might be, if we're going to go this route, more numerous than the other races.
Man, this cacti race has really gotten to be much more important than I thought they were going to be.
We don't have to go with it, but what do you think?
It would make sense then why they're the ones always tabbed to go, like, thin the herd. Because the cactus people can kill them, but they're not going to, like, eat them and grow stronger.
This would also create an interesting alliance between the humans and the elves. The elves have the tech, but the elves are still food. So the elves have outfitted the humans to be, at times they're like chosen warriors.
I like where you're going with that. Another reason why humans are described as being the most numerous is just because compared to every other playable race every other playable race and most other races excluding goblins and orcs, humans are the fastest breeding ones. That's why they are more numerous. So, like, humans are viewed as just more expendable.
I like the idea that the orc or goblin race, whatever it is, are just breeding like rabbits, just completely overrunning whatever amount of, ecological resource they have available to them. They're just kind of like
So what if
locusts.
The goblins and the orcs are like they're really fast breeders, but nobody else can really control them the way that like other races can give incentives toward humans to have them do this dirty work.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are able to recognize the benefits of all of the things that the dwarves and the elves and the gnomes and stuff. We can recognize the benefits of all of their advances. So the goblins are they're just too feral in order to be usable by the more cultured races. So humans have the advantage where they are civilized enough that they can recognize all of the benefits that the other longer-lived races possess and can then take advantage of it. And so that allows particularly the elves, but also the other races, to be able to manipulate humans in a way that they can get shit done and be a big power in the world. But they're still kind of under the thumb of the other races.
Maybe the goblins are like super short-lived. So, like, no given generation of them even has, like, the foresight enough and self-interest to, like, settle down and establish anything. Like, if they're, like, in old age by, like, 20,
Mm-hmm.
if they live, like, dog years or something,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they've got enough brain power that they're, like, more advanced than, like, chimps or something, but they just don't have the time scale in life to build up something established and organized.
Yeah.
Are we still having then there be a playable goblin? We keep saying goblin/orc. Are we?
Well, in Tolkien, they were the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, they're not in D&D. Are we saying that there's a green-skinned goblinoid race in the forest that's also playable, that's also numerous but very short-lived? And
Yeah.
Okay, I'm cool with that. I'm just making sure we're establishing them, because I mean, in D&D you can't play a goblin, obviously. So like, I'm fine with this, and
Yeah, I picture like the peak intellectual development of something like this to be something akin to like a really impulsive teenager. You know, like you never get old enough to really get wisdom or anything. You're just like, let's do it.
The idea I had was maybe there was briefly, for like a generation or two, a united like empire that came about of having finally beat back or whatever system of government we want it to be. They united the races in like maybe either a UN style deal, or it was just an empire, not like a classical version of empire, not like the whole Persian like King of Kings, like a bunch of different cultures under one ruler sort of deal.
Mm-hmm.
That came out of having beat the Cactus people, and that gives political players something to strive for and to justify like intrigues. Is like, well, I'm just working for the good of everyone to bring back that golden era where everyone was at peace and blah blah blah.
How long ago was that, though? Has the Cactus people been defeated like really long ago, or is it relatively recently, like a generation ago? So we're still trying to figure out how all of this stuff works.
maybe long enough ago that the shorter-lived races, it's been generations. I just had the thought that the Cactus people, their natural enemy is the technologically advanced elves. When the elves finally maybe created this coalition, empire, whatever you want to call it, that you're talking about, Kyle, they united some races, they had the tech, they pushed back the Cactus people once and for all. The empire was looking strong, and then maybe the elves decided, short-lived races generations ago, to retire to the poles and begin to seek out the secrets of the Dyson Sphere, and left the other races into their sort of own, like, the technology, the aqueducts began to crumble, the other races couldn't repair them, the elves didn't really give a shit, and there are surviving elves who are around for this, but maybe not a lot of other races have surviving elders who are around for this. What do you guys think?
I'd be happy with that. Like, maybe, like, the idea of empire is still there. Everybody, well, the long-lived races still kind of recognize it, but the humans, and they don't really recognize it because it's so long ago to them. For the elves, like, yes, my father was the king, was the high king at that time, and I'm the successor. Whereas, like, the dwarves, yes, that was my great grandpa. Mm-hmm. But then you get to humans, that was 30 generations ago.
Right, like shit. I like that idea a lot.
It also creates an interesting impetus for players of the long-lived races to maybe want to
bring that back.
Yeah, my great grandfather, Thorine Slatebeard, was a ruler of this particular part of the country that is now overrun with these damn, goblins who only live 20 years long. They don't remember the traditions. They can't possibly. And so you've got, that, plus you've got a goblin player who's just like, dude, I'm just trying to fuck, party, and, like, get strong, because I only have 10 years of being able to do that.
God, that's awful. Like, you reach
I love it.
You reach the age of, like, maturity and adulthood at 10, which gives you just a decade. That's all you got.
Yep.
I was thinking, like, a year was considered, like, yes, I have now reached goblin adulthood. I now have 19 years to work with. But no. No, you're a little goblin baby for 10 fucking years, and then you die.
Then it's time to fuck bitches, make money. That's all you're doing.
Good lord. That's funny.
So we're establishing some dynamics. Is this enough to say, here's the status quo as the players enter the game when they pick up this book off the shelves and read it and run a game of it? Are we there yet?
I say so. Like I go back to my original point of like I think it's best to not obviously fill in your corners, don't make plot holes, but like don't overinvest because like the odds of that coming up or being used typically like if you have to make something up on the spot for that, that's better than like trying to force people to care about it.
Can we flesh out the merfolk a little more? Because I think they're probably the one remaining race that I think really has some potential to be like an important.
Oh, and didn't we initially say they were going to be like Atlantean?
I came to the same thought right as I said that wrap-up speech. Yeah, we need to flesh them out, and we had talked about them being more advanced, I think.
They have no reason to give a fuck about cactus shit.
They can live underwater.
What elves are doing, like...
I like the idea of them as a civilization... Fuck.
You got it.
I like the idea of them fuck. Can we fuck them?
I mean, you can fuck about anything.
Alright, good to know.
Jesus.
As a civilizational counterweight to the elves. The elves had to deal with all this cactus shit, but the merfolk didn't. And so they just got their cities down there, and they're just like, alright, like, I like the idea of them being, like, polar opposites. Or not polar opposites, but, like, they have their own version of civilization, quote-unquote, that's just as advanced as the elves. But they don't, you're right, why would they come out and try to fight these cactuses? They don't need to.
I seem to remember several generations ago, the elves had some kind of problem with some plant thing. How'd that shake out? I don't know, fuck it.
So if the elves are concerned with the Dyson Sphere, and the elves are concerned with enlightenment, and they've had to deal with the cactus people, is the aquatic race, the merfolk, maybe they're the most, and we keep saying that the elves are the most advanced. They're the most magically advanced. They create, magical weapons to give to the humans to go and fight the cactus people. They create, scrying spells, and they can walk the plains. But maybe the merfolk are, like, literal, like, fucking steam engine technology. They don't give a shit about the Dyson Sphere. They don't give a shit about...
How do you do steam engine
I don't know, Jordan.
Development underwater?
I don't know.
I'd rather see it flipped. I'd rather see elves doing such advanced science that it looks like magic to most people, and these water races that, plays into the whole, like psychic dolphin kind of, like, sci-fi fantasy trope that, like, they're doing magical shit because... How the fuck do you develop science underwater?
You can't burn anything underwater.
Fucking lava tubes. And those, like, hot gas vents.
That are not portable in any way.
Nuclear reactors. I don't know. I just liked the idea of them being very in touch with the physical world. But we can reverse that. Regardless, I think the elves and the merfolk should be sort of a dichotomy in themselves.
I would like a dichotomy between the elves and the merfolk, with the merfolk having lifespans kind of similar to humans, but they haven't had this big cataclysm basically kicking them back down civilization-wise, so they are pretty advanced for the reasons we said, why their technology would not be advanced, but they're an unknown on the land, and maybe they could be that force that we had hinted at the beginning that doesn't quite fit into the cosmology or into the worldview.
Ooh.
They're the things they come like basically out of the water in these basically like golem, only it's an actual person inside the golem mech. They just come stomping out ready to take over the world.
And you're gonna be like, I don't know who the fuck these I've never been underwater a day in my life. Like, who the fuck are these guys?
Hey, maybe the very core of the planet upon which the mortals live is actually a liquid core. And these merfolk people are just everywhere down there in the other world, in the underneath. And they're our outsider. It could be Naboo. But regardless, I guess we're now saying the merfolk are not playable if we're having them be the other.
I'd almost be okay with that, personally.
I'm fine with that.
So back down to 6 playable races.
That's a
nice
good
even
number.
number, yeah.
How many does traditional D&D have? Like 6, right? Or 8?
There's a lot in the player's handbook.
Weird.
Yeah.
There's like 10.
Well, we got those races mostly sketched out, and we have a general worldview. What political organizations do these things have now? Because the World Coalition, World Empire thing is gone. So, like, what are people doing now? Or is it just a hodgepodge of everything? Does it not matter? Like, you know, you always do the cop-out and be like, yes, the jungle dwarves have, like, a traditional tribal structure, blah, 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 you know. I like the idea that the steppe gnomes have, like, trial by combat, and the strongest gets to be the winner.
I also like to think there's a shitload of them, like, in these complicated cave structures under the ground. You go out to the plains and you see nothing. Right underneath your feet, there's like a city of 100,000 of these things.
That's crazy.
What is the general vibe of our world? Are we talking Conan brutality? Are we talking, pristine, everybody is fucking physically attractive, high fantasy? Like, what are we looking at here?
This world feels low-tech to me to start with, and the shit that, like, the elves might drop off are, for all intents and purposes, a magical device, wand of flame throwing. But the humans, and everybody else, it sounds like they're fairly scattered around and probably don't have a super sophisticated, large-scale society for the most part, Certainly not like Roman Empire level stuff. That's my take. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Is our world semi-post-apocalyptic with crumbling elven technology that they've abandoned to go on their Dyson Sphere quest, with the occasional drop-off of things that they provide to keep the cactus people at bay? Is it... Wow, what's that damn Sean Connery movie?
Zardoz. I've been thinking of it for like 10 minutes now.
Nice. Fucking Zardoz.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reel myself back in. I don't want this to be a post-apocalyptic world, but I do love the idea of elven infrastructure that is kind of working, kind of not. People have some resentment for the elves for, not being around to maintain this infrastructure. But they also recognize that they're fairly benevolent when they choose to actually do something. And our races are otherwise, I don't know. Kyle, you're much better at fucking, pointing out like a level of technology or like an age. Like what? I'm having trouble narrowing down what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to stop talking.
It honestly sounds like the initial comparison was like right after late antiquity, like, because it wasn't like the Roman Empire fell and the people just like forgot how to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really totally forget how to do it completely, really, either. But there was a period where like that knowledge was kind of starting to get fuzzy. So it kind of sounds like that's where this is. Like we had that, and that was initially kind of my comparison. Was we had that World Empire Rome-esque kind of deal that fell apart. Now everyone's kind of like picking up the pieces and either like claiming descent from it or doing something, or like when you have something like that, your claims to legitimacy are either I'm like that or I'm not like that. Mm-hmm. So you would have organizations being like, yes, we can claim descendancy for this reason, and then other people being like, we are different from them on purpose. And then tech-wise, it would basically be like there's still stuff there, and probably some people know how to use them, to a good portion of people know how to use the stuff the elves left behind. And science is still, we don't really have like a dark age here, like science is still progressing. So I think we're kind of in a weird mix where,
So there's pockets where the science and everything is still progressing, but for the most part, things are just kind of degrading.
Yeah.
Things are, like we had said before, entropy was going to be like
a theme.
Was a theme.
Mm-hmm.
So, like to use the Roman Empire as an example, the elves decided, you know what, we're going to go over to we're going to found Constantinople and move our seat there when they go to the pole, and then everybody else is left. Well, I guess we're going to make the Papal States here in Italy and the Carolingian dynasty here in France, and everybody's kind of just, well, we got to make do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got to use what you have.
So, people playing in this game, it seems like we're making 3 major kind of campaign suggestions. One would be exploring the Dyson Sphere and the outer realm of the Immortals. One would be dealing with this mystery threat from the deep. And one would be figuring out the politics of this, not exactly power vacuum, but everything you guys just described very well.
So I think you kind of described in reverse order, level 1 through 7, level 8 through 15, and the level 15 to 20. So, at the very beginning, when you're low level, you're, all the machinations that are going on in your local level. And then once you get to, level 7 or 8, well, that's when the merfolk come riding in and pose a big threat to everything that you know. And you find out that the world is bigger than you thought. And then once you get to the final levels, you're like, oh shit, this is just one world. There's a whole other world out there. What are we going to do about that?
I like that. And I think that pretty much, sets a good expectation. Because I was just thinking, having a band of nobles would make this game pretty interesting. Does that make sense? Having the players be relatively nobility, so you can really engage with that fragmented world aspect, and heck, maybe one of these is that son that was I'm a fresh elf, but my dad was the High King, and everyone's yeah, that was 100, 200 years ago, and he's
yeah, 10 years after I was born.
Yeah. So, I think you could have interesting stuff like that. Did we miss anything glaring?
There's one thing that most campaign settings that I've read have, and that is basically a starting area that is pretty well defined. Forgotten Realms has Waterdeep, Eberron has Sharn, Greyhawk has the city of the castle of Greyhawk. Every setting has basically this area where there's more information designed for you to start out in, or start in its environs. Do we have something like that here? Are we going to say that, do we want it to be the area where the elves had their power and have now abandoned, and now everybody's just kind of filling in that vacuum? Is that the area that we want to have basically the default start of the campaign to be?
I don't see why not. As a player, you're going to get introduced to the semi-failing but still functional technology that remains. You're going to have a nice, safe introduction. It's going to be a larger area where you have probably all the races people can play, at least groups of them living there. And then as soon as you get out into the world, you're going to stumble across, subterranean gnome warrens and
the most terrifying creatures of all.
Yeah, and our Saguarans. Ooh. Oh. Oh, I named them.
And you got the Thunderbirds still flying around once you leave that starting area. How many of them are left? Who knows? But
do we want the starting area to be much more cosmopolitan with a smattering of all the races than the rest of the world?
I like that. I think that gives a chance for everyone to feasibly be my character would be here versus having to go in your backstory and invent some I was an elf, but I was raised by humans, so I am a child of both worlds or some shit, and you're okay, well, easy there, text. Let's you can just live here. This is it's like a remnant, like a holdover from the world order.
I just had a thought. I wonder what you guys think about it with regards to what playable races are allowed. I've never seen this done, I don't think. But what if, wherever you start, whatever races are around there, those are your options. And you can't do this, I'm some super exotic thing that just happened to wander into this place. You've got a menu of races to choose from for your character when you started. And then as the game progresses and people travel around to different places, for the time period that you are in that place, if someone wants to retire their old character or whatever and play a new thing, that's a window of opportunity for them to make this, weird prairie dog thing that just happens to be available here. And if you want to tag along, you can make that character and try that out for a little while. That's kind of how it works in, old Super Nintendo role-playing games. Like, you go to the weird land, find the, PC version of that person, and then you can, choose to add them to your party or not.
So you unlock additional races by exploring their domain?
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm happy to facilitate or encourage players to do that. It's obviously not forcing anyone to do that. But it would be strange to start in this fairly safe, interesting, buffet-style, cosmopolitan setting, and then have one of the party members be like, I'm going to play a bat. What are they again? Bat
halflings.
A batling. That wouldn't make much sense. Baffling. Baffling. I like that too.
So now we got one final question. Is this a setting you think you would be interested in playing in? I personally wouldn't. I'm just going to throw this in the trash after we get done with it. I'm kidding.
It hits on a lot of things that I like about any setting. Crumbling technology that is, so far advanced it seems like magic. Quite unique races, at least if I do say so myself. And the promise of getting to explore what equates to outer space. Those things hit home to me pretty hard.
Man, it's almost like you heavily participated in the creation of this game.
No!
I think this is a tough question because, all of us put stuff in we like.
Mm.
I love the fucking Roman late antiquity shit, and that's basically the setting. So obviously I'm invested in that, and I like fantasy. I feel like that answered that question. I'd be very surprised if either of you were just I actually put in things I hated.
Fucking, I handicapped this world with things I hate.
I enjoy playing in most settings, I think. I would be interested in running this. I'd make some tweaks and elaborations and stuff, but, it's weird enough that, it would be interesting and novel in a lot of ways.
So, let's go on to geek things because we're running a little bit long. So, does anyone else want to go first? I don't want... I suspect that I may step on KP's toes with a geek thing that happened recently, so I don't want to go first.
All right, let me start with an article that I found in Bloomberg. I believe it was entitled "The Rise of the Professional Dungeon Master."
I was about to send you that article when you sent it to me. No joke.
It was a very interesting article. Obviously, a lot of these people are in L.A. and San Francisco, where people have deep pockets to drop $300-400 for a game session or something. But one of the more interesting little data points in the whole article was this table where I think the data comes from some interactive online character sheet thing, but it breaks down the popularity of what players want to play by race and then by class. And so you can look at this chart. It doesn't have numbers on it. It's all graphical. I want to see the numbers. But the rows are races and the columns are classes within those races. And I've never seen that kind of data collection on actual player behavior in D&D before.
But this data is collected from people of high socioeconomic class, right?
No, I think this comes from an online source that people use to generate characters. I'm not sure exactly where it comes from. It had kind of a shitty citation on it, but it's a lot of what you'd expect. Humans are definitely the majority, or plurality. I always get those fucked up. And you see a ton of fighters. And it's rogues, wizard, paladin, cleric. Those are kind of the big ones. Hardly anybody plays sorcerers, druids, barbarians, and warlocks. Those are very tiny. And Then when you start getting into races, it becomes very specific to what those races are good at class-wise. You see a ton of like elf rangers, elf wizards, elf rogues, a lot of halfling rogues.
Not many half-orc bards.
You don't see half-orc bards. You don't see halfling warlocks. You know, I don't know. I can't remember all the details just off the top of my head, but it's pretty interesting. They even go into like a lot of weird side classes of fearbolgs and like, you know, Goliaths and these like setting specific things. So it's neat to look at.
Clayton, were you going to talk about Hayabusa 2?
I was.
No. Well,
But I allowed you to.
Well, thank you. I actually did spend yesterday about 8 hours researching Hayabusa 2 and also reading a book that I acquired several years ago called Emerging Space Powers. And so I learned all about the history of Japan's space program. And my goal is to, I've submitted them anyway, run some panels at Colossal Con East over in Pennsylvania, where I talk about Japan's space program and Hayabusa 2. Hayabusa 2 is a lander sent to an asteroid named Ryugu. It's actually more than just a lander. It's a pretty amazing little craft. It's a spacecraft capable of touching down on the very low gravity environment of this asteroid called Ryugu. That's Ryugu. It's a weird word to say out loud. And anyway, back in, I believe it was April, Hayabusa 2 bombed an asteroid. They sent down something called a lightweight impactor something. Anyway, they called it the impactor. And it was a little explosive charge that Hayabusa fired at the asteroid or dropped towards it. And it blew a small crater hole in this asteroid that was selected partially because it is very old. It's either an extrasolar capture or it is from the formation of our solar system. So this thing, this hole that has been exposed back in April by this bomb, exposed the nougaty center of an asteroid that hasn't been exposed for 4.5 billion years.
Is that what's in there?
Nougats, yeah.
Wow.
And caramel. And Hayabusa, just as of, is it 2 days ago?
Local time, it was Wednesday. Greenwich Mean Time, it was Thursday.
Cool. Literally this week, landed, I should have let Clayton talk about it, landed right next to this crater that they, exposed. And it's going to take, well, it already took surface samples from the, exterior regolith of the asteroid before it made the crater, and now it's taking samples of this 4.5 billion year old caramel, sweet caramel, at the center of the asteroid. And the goal, next year, hopefully, it's been a stellar success so far, is to return these samples to Earth, and they will be studied alongside, and they're going to share information with the, with NASA's, mission to Bennu, OSIRIS-REx. Being that mission. So, cool stuff, exploring really old rocks.
And we already have the pictures taken from the asteroid's surface.
Mm-hmm.
They look very cool.
This Hayabusa freaking spacecraft, it deployed rovers rather. It deployed a lander that's stationary, and it deployed some rovers that move. They have these like spikes sticking out of the surface of this, tiny little plastic cylinder, and the spikes cause this rover to hop because the gravity's so low on this asteroid. It was a really, really complex, very cool little spacecraft. I'm done now.
All right. So the only additional thing I have is a website that I discovered called thispersondoesnotexist.com. At this website, an AI generates photorealistic pictures of people that don't exist.
Awesome.
And it doesn't get it quite perfect. This is perfect for pictures of people for like a horror game, a Call of Cthulhu game, because like the teeth aren't quite right. It doesn't do ears quite right. I found one where this person had a pinkish malformed eye in their forehead.
Whoa.
A person appeared to have plant roots integrated in their hair. The place where the photos most often have the weirdest shit is in the periphery. Sometimes, like, it's creating these images from images that it can find online. So sometimes you have, like, people in your picture with you, and it doesn't quite know how to do another person in the picture. So I've got this one where it's a person in the center, and then you got this little part of another person's head kind of leaning in, like, next to them. Only you can only see probably a quarter of their face, and it's very clear at the very center of their face is this giant gemstone. And some of the backgrounds clearly are on another planet. So this is an amazing resource for sci-fi and horror games.
This is awesome.
All right, guys. What do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
All right.
Thanks for listening to our world.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.